We're back with the Hall Public Policy Institute looking at the question of stem cell research. When we broke, Father, you were talking about the uses of these stem cells and how viable they are.
Yeah, the idea being that when you have a flexible cell type to begin with, what people hope is that it'll be possible to derive, for example, heart cells or kidney cells or any place that you might have a point of damage in the body. The idea would be that you'd have a fresh starting source of these cells. And, you know, that idea of a kind of blank cell, a generic cell that gives you a new starting point really represents a whole new era, if you will, in medicine, a whole new field of medicine, the field of regenerative medicine. So it's understandable why there's a lot of excitement around this. We haven't had this kind of possibility in the past in the medical sciences.
Paul, what does it mean for a family that's interested in the question of stem cell exploration?
Well, it's interesting, Mike. A couple of years ago, I threw myself, I guess, into this issue publicly by writing an op-ed piece that was really born out of a frustration that I think, again, on a personal level, a lot of families feel. You know, on the one hand, they hear the scientific viewpoints and the real potential and promise that embryonic stem cell research might have, and they hear the religious concerns on the other side, and they're legitimate concerns, and they need to be sensitive to them. But for a lot of families struggling, trying to help other family members, it's just a lot of background noise. And the fact is they want to help, and I want to help my sister, and I want to do anything I can to sort of move this science forward. And my belief is that there's a way to sort of bring the two sides together, if you will, that the choice between one and the other is a false choice, and that we need to find a way to be sensitive to the religious concerns while allowing the science to move forward.
Now, my understanding is that the advantages of embryonic stem cell research is they're more flexible in the sense that they allow you to they can both be specialized cell types, but also allow you to deal with creating tissues and organs. Beyond that, is that correct? Is that a legitimate differentiation between the use of embryonic stem cell research and just regular stem cells that you'd get out of my hand?
I think there's a misunderstanding. Blood stem cells are really good at forming different blood derivatives. And I would say getting blood cells from embryonic stem cells is much harder. So if you had a blood-borne disease or some disease that blood stem cells could cure, I would aim at research or using that type of material. And that can be said for pretty much any specific disease. The advantage of embryonic stem cells or cells that are like embryonic stem cells is generally their default pathways are for neural tissue, for brain-derived tissue. And there's very little alternatives aside from fetal tissue to generate genuine brain cells.
What about the much publicized concerns, for example, of Christopher Reeves and his family in terms of spinal regeneration? Is that a way in which we can find a legitimate use for spinal regeneration? You're working on that, aren't you? Is that part of that?
So in our lab, there is we're looking for a stem cell called a radioglial cell, which actually bridges the gap between the healthy and injured tissue. And you have to imagine when you're conceived and you grow from a fetus to a full-grown individual, you start out, nearly an inch long and end up being several inches, a foot, and your spine and your tissue grow very differently compared to your nerve cells. So we're not going to transplant a stem cell in your brain and have it grow through the spinal cord. We actually have to hasten the internal repair program. So some stem cells will do that. Whereas the injury with Christopher Reeve was very extensive at the very base of his head, and that would have required a slightly different strategy. So we don't even know, because we're not at that stage yet where we can cure or even treat spinal cord injury with any type of stem cell.
What happens to the long-term advantages and disadvantages of this? Do we have a timetable that what is possible? What should I expect that some progress is going to be made for some particular diseases in the next 5 years, 10 years?
There are rumored trials from a company called Geron out in California. They've generated white matter forming cells. These are the cells that die during multiple sclerosis. They've generated those from embryonic stem cells, and they have to screen them for safety so they don't form tumors. So one of the big issues with human embryonic stem cells is they lose their ability to stop dividing. So you have to treat them in a certain way to get them to stop dividing. And apparently they've done so, and they're looking to transplant these cells in the next year or so. If those are successful, then it will prove that the embryonic stem cells can be used in therapies.
Now, Father, there's a researcher named Lanza who apparently has argued that he's developed techniques where he can use adult stem cells as successfully as embryonic. Is that
Robert Lanza's work actually is what he's most known for was a proposal that he came up with at Advanced Cell Technology that takes an embryo that has 8 cells on it and plucks off one of the 8 cells. And the attempt is then to use that one cell that has been removed to generate a stem cell line with the possibility that the remaining 7 cells of the embryo could survive and continue to grow. And he has been trying to tout this as if it were an ethical solution. Now, of course, the problem here is that you are you're removing more than 10% of the body mass of another human being, not for any reasons that are directed towards benefiting that human. That human doesn't have any disease that's being treated right now, but merely because you want to do your experiments. So you're treating that embryonic human as a means rather than as an end that should be respected and never violated. So Lanza's proposal actually doesn't solve any of the ethical conundrums that are associated with this entire field.
Now, your background is in biochemistry.
Biochemistry was one of the things that I studied, yes.
And what I want to do is to examine in our next section what implications the research that both of you are talking about has on other branches of medicine and other branches of research. Are we likely to see breakthroughs in those areas almost accidentally? So we'll stop here and we'll come back for our third segment.